The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Whitmore Palace as Queen Consort Elisabetta adjusted her pearl necklace with trembling hands. She had discovered something that would change everything. For weeks, she had noticed strange behaviors from her sister-in-law, Princess Margaret, but never imagined the truth would be this explosive. King Alexander sat in his study, reviewing state papers when Elisabetta entered without knocking. This alone told him something was terribly wrong. His wife never broke protocol unless absolutely necessary. The way she closed the heavy oak door behind her and leaned against it made his heart skip a beat. "We need to talk about Margaret," Elisabetta said, her voice barely above a whisper. The king set down his fountain pen and removed his reading glasses. He had ruled the kingdom for 5 years since his mother's passing, but nothing had prepared him for what his wife was about to reveal. Princess Margaret had always been the Iron Lady of the royal family. At 68, she commanded respect from everyone, from stable boys to prime ministers. Her military background and no-nonsense attitude made her the most admired member of the royal household. She had never married, dedicating her entire life to serving the crown and supporting her younger brother through every crisis. Elisabetta moved to the window, watching the palace guards change shifts in the courtyard below. She had spent sleepless nights debating whether to share what she had discovered. The burden of knowledge weighed heavily on her shoulders. Margaret had been nothing but kind to her when she married Alexander, helping her navigate the complex world of royal protocols and expectations. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together," Alexander said, rising from his desk. He had seen that look on his wife's face only once before, when they received news of his mother's terminal illness. The king walked to his wife and took her hands in his. They were ice cold despite the warm morning. Elisabetta looked into her husband's eyes, seeing the same gentle soul she had fallen in love with 25 years ago. How would this revelation change him? How would it change their family? The secret she carried could destroy the very foundation of trust that held the royal family together. Last month, when Margaret claimed she was visiting her charity in Scotland, she wasn't there, Elisabetta began. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I discovered this by accident when the charity director called to reschedule Margaret's upcoming visit. She mentioned they hadn't seen the princess in over 3 months. Alexander frowned. His sister had never lied to him before, or so he thought. Margaret's dedication to her charitable causes was legendary. She had established dozens of organizations supporting veterans, children's education, and medical research. Why would she lie about visiting one of them? "There's more," Elisabetta said, pulling a manila envelope from her jacket. "I hired a discreet private investigator. I know I should have consulted you first, but I needed to be certain before bringing this to you." She handed the envelope to her husband with shaking hands. The king's fingers fumbled with the metal clasp. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be medical records. As he examined each piece of evidence, his face transformed from confusion to disbelief, then to something Elisabetta had rarely seen: pure emotional vulnerability. The photographs showed Margaret entering and leaving a modest cottage in the countryside. In several images, she was accompanied by a woman in her 40s with striking red hair. But it was the last set of photos that made Alexander sink into the nearest chair. They showed Margaret embracing the woman, and, in one particularly clear shot, a young man who bore an unmistakable resemblance to the princess. "This can't be real," Alexander whispered, but, even as the words left his mouth, he knew the truth. The medical records confirmed what the photographs suggested. Margaret had given birth to a son 24 years ago, during what the family had believed was her extended diplomatic mission to Australia. Elisabetta knelt beside her husband's chair. The investigator verified everything. The woman, Catherine Mills, was Margaret's private secretary during that Australia trip. They've been in contact all these years. The young man, James, just graduated from medical school. He has no idea about his true parentage. The morning sun climbed higher, flooding the study with golden light that seemed too cheerful for such a momentous revelation. Alexander's mind raced through the implications. The press would have a field day if this became public. The conservative elements in Parliament would demand explanations. But, more than political consequences, he thought about his sister, carrying this secret alone for over 2 decades. "How did you know to look into this?" Alexander asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Elisabetta explained how she had noticed Margaret's subtle changes in behavior. The princess had started taking mysterious phone calls, always stepping out of rooms to answer them. She had begun making unexplained trips, always with perfectly reasonable cover stories. Most telling was the way Margaret's face had changed when they attended young Prince William's graduation last spring, a wistful, almost maternal expression that Elisabetta had never seen before. "We have to confront her," Alexander said finally, standing up with renewed determination. But, not as king and subject. As brother and sister. She must have been so frightened, so alone all these years. Elisabetta was struck by her husband's compassion. Many monarchs would have reacted with anger or immediately thought of damage control. But Alexander's first instinct was to understand and support his sister. This was why she loved him, why the people loved him. They found Margaret in the rose garden, her favorite spot for morning contemplation. She was seated on a stone bench, feeding breadcrumbs to the peacocks that roamed the palace grounds. In her casual morning attire, without the weight of military medals or royal sashes, she looked vulnerable, almost fragile. "Margaret," Alexander called out softly. She turned, smiling at first, but her expression changed when she saw their faces. The breadcrumbs scattered from her lap as she stood, her military bearing automatically straightening her spine. "You know," she said. It wasn't a question. The princess, who had faced down prime ministers and foreign dignitaries, suddenly looked like a frightened young woman. "How long have you known?" Elisabetta stepped forward. "Only since this morning." "Margaret, why didn't you tell us?" "We're family." Margaret's composure, maintained through decades of public service, finally cracked. Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks as she sank back onto the bench. Alexander sat beside her, pulling his older sister into an embrace she hadn't allowed herself to receive in years. "I was 22, Margaret began, her voice muffled against her brother's shoulder. "Young, foolish, and in love. Catherine was everything I couldn't be: free, spontaneous, unbound by duty. When I discovered I was pregnant, I knew it would destroy everything. Not just my life, but the monarchy itself. It was a different time. The scandal would have been catastrophic." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the determination that had carried her through countless challenges. "Mother helped me. Can you imagine? Our proper, traditional mother. She arranged everything: the extended trip to Australia, the discreet medical care, the adoption arrangements. But when I saw him, my son, I couldn't let him go entirely." "So Catherine adopted him?" Elisabetta asked gently, sitting on Margaret's other side. Margaret nodded. "She loved him as her own. We agreed she would raise him away from the spotlight, give him a normal life. I provided financial support through anonymous trusts. I watched from afar as he grew up, celebrated his achievements in silence, cried alone when he struggled." The peacocks had returned, pecking at the scattered breadcrumbs, oblivious to the human drama unfolding. Alexander thought about all the times Margaret had seemed distant, the celebration she had left early, the family gatherings where her smile never quite reached her eyes. How had they all missed her pain? "Does he know about you at all?" Alexander asked. "He knows he's adopted. Catherine told him that much when he turned 18. But he's never shown interest in finding his birth parents. He's happy, successful, engaged to a lovely young woman. Why would I disrupt that?" Elisabetta squeezed Margaret's hand. "Because you're his mother. Because he has a right to know where he comes from. Because secrets have a way of revealing themselves, and it's better if he hears it from you." Margaret looked at her brother, the king, searching his face for judgment but finding only love and understanding. "What about the crown? The succession? The scandal?" Alexander smiled sadly. "Times have changed, Margaret. The world is more accepting now. Yes, there will be those who criticize, but there will be many more who admire your strength, your sacrifice." As for the succession, James would have no claim. He was born outside of marriage and adopted legally by another. "You're not angry?" Margaret asked, her voice small and uncertain. "I'm heartbroken," Alexander admitted. "Not because of what you did, but because you've carried this alone for so long. We failed you, Margaret. The institution we served demanded too much. No one should have to choose between love and duty the way you did." The sun was fully up now, warming the garden and chasing away the morning chill. Somewhere in the palace, the daily routine continued, servants preparing breakfast, guards changing posts, administrators beginning their work. But, in the rose garden, 3 people sat in a bubble of shared truth and newfound understanding. "What do I do now?" Margaret asked, the question hanging in the air like morning mist. Elisabetta, ever practical, had already been thinking ahead. "First, we speak with Catherine. She's been your partner in this secret, she deserves to be part of any decision. Then, if you decide to tell James, we do it privately, away from any media attention. We control the narrative. And if the press finds out?" Margaret's fear was palpable. "Then, we face it together," Alexander said firmly. "As a family. You've protected the crown all your life, Margaret. Now let the crown protect you." Margaret began to cry again, but these tears were different, tears of relief, of gratitude, of a burden finally shared. She had expected anger, disappointment, perhaps even exile. Instead, she found acceptance and love. Over the following days, the palace machinery quietly went into motion. Trusted advisors were brought into confidence, legal consultations were held, and communication strategies were developed. But, at the heart of it all was a very human story, a woman who had sacrificed her own happiness for what she believed was the greater good, and a family rallying around her. Catherine Mills was contacted and invited to the palace. The reunion between her and Margaret, witnessed only by Alexander and Elisabetta, was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Catherine, now a successful businesswoman, had never stopped loving Margaret. She had raised James with stories of his birth mother's strength and nobility, never naming her but planting seeds of admiration. "I always hoped this day would come," Catherine said, holding Margaret's hands across the private dining table. "James deserves to know his incredible heritage, and you deserve to know your incredible son." The meeting with James was arranged for the following week at Catherine's countryside home, the same cottage where Margaret had spent stolen moments over the years. Elisabetta helped Margaret prepare, both emotionally and practically. They spent hours discussing what to say, how to explain decades of absence without seeming to make excuses. "Just speak from your heart," Elisabetta advised. "He's a doctor. He understands that life is complex, that people make difficult choices for complicated reasons." On the day of the meeting, Alexander insisted on accompanying his sister. "You've been alone in this for too long," he said. "I want James to know from the start that he's not just gaining a mother, but an entire family who will welcome him if he chooses." The drive to the countryside was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. Margaret clutched a small photo album she had secretly kept, pictures of James that Catherine had sent over the years, marked with dates and small notes about his achievements. First day of school. Science fair winner. University acceptance. Medical school graduation. When they arrived at the cottage, Catherine met them at the door. She had prepared James as best she could, telling him only that his birth mother wanted to meet him and that she was someone who had made difficult choices out of love. James was in the living room, standing by the fireplace. The resemblance to Margaret was undeniable, the same strong jaw, the same intelligent eyes, even the same way of holding his shoulders. When he saw her, his composed medical professional demeanor flickered, replaced by the vulnerability of a child needing a parent. "Hello, James," Margaret said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm your mother." What followed was a conversation 24 years in the making. Margaret explained everything, the circumstances of his birth, the agonizing decision to give him up, the constant presence she had maintained from afar. She showed him the photo album, each picture a testament to a love that distance couldn't diminish. James listened quietly, occasionally asking questions that showed both his analytical mind and his emotional intelligence. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, simply absorbed the story of his origins with a maturity that made Margaret proud. "I don't expect you to understand or forgive," Margaret said finally. "I just wanted you to know the truth, to know that you were loved every single day of your life, even when I couldn't be there." James was quiet for a long moment, then he spoke. "I've had a good life. Mom, Catherine, gave me everything I needed. I've never felt unloved or unwanted. But there was always something missing, a piece of my story I couldn't quite grasp. Now I understand." He stood and walked to Margaret, who rose to meet him. "I don't need to forgive you because I don't blame you. You made the best decision you could with the circumstances you faced. But I would like to know you now, if that's possible." The embrace that followed broke down the last walls Margaret had built around her heart. Mother and son, separated by necessity but united by choice, held each other as Catherine and Alexander watched with tears in their eyes. In the weeks that followed, James was gradually introduced to his new reality. He met his cousins, toured the palace, learned about the family history that was also his history. The young doctor handled it all with grace and humor, traits he had inherited from both his mothers. The public revelation, when it came, was managed carefully. Margaret gave a single, dignified interview explaining her choice and asking for privacy as the family adjusted to their new dynamic. The reaction was mixed, as expected, but the overwhelming response was one of sympathy and respect for a woman who had sacrificed so much for duty. James chose not to take any titles or public role, preferring to continue his medical career. But he became a regular presence at family gatherings, bringing his fiancée into the fold of a family that grew stronger through adversity. Alexander, watching his sister bloom with newfound happiness, often reflected on the cost of secrets and the power of truth. The monarchy had survived scandals before, but this revelation had done something more. It had humanized them, showing that even those who seemed most rigid in their duty were capable of deep love and painful sacrifice. Elisabetta, who had started this journey with a suspicious discovery, became Margaret's closest confidant and James's biggest champion. She used her position to advocate for modernization within the royal household, ensuring that future generations wouldn't face the same impossible choices. The palace, once shocked by the revelation, adapted as it always had. New protocols were written, new understandings reached. But, in the private quarters, away from the public eye, a family had been reunited and made whole. Margaret, no longer carrying her secret burden, threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. But, now, when she attended charity events or military ceremonies, she did so with a lightness that had been missing for decades. Sometimes, James would accompany her, the proud son of a woman who had loved him enough to let him go and brave enough to welcome him back. The story that had begun with a shocking revelation had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the enduring power of love, the strength found in truth, and the healing that comes when families choose acceptance over judgment. In the end, the palace walls that had once seemed like a prison became a shelter for a love story that spanned decades and defied convention. As the seasons changed and life moved forward, the royal family emerged stronger and more united than ever. They had learned that the greatest strength didn't come from maintaining perfect facades but from having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, and to choose love over fear. The secret that Elisabetta had uncovered hadn't destroyed them, it had set them free.